Hello everyone, today we're taking a look at the Geelang Wasp V2. This one comes with a number of different receiver options and I'll have them linked down below in the video description. Comes with Geelang 0802 14,000 kV motors, 65mm press-on props. The all-in-one flight controller is the Play 4 Whoop. Noted the version is F411 CEU6. It has a 5 amp ESC, and the peak ESC amp burst rating is 7 amps for 3 seconds, with a 2 amp 5 volt BEC. Comes with Betaflight 4.2. The VTX right down in there, it goes from 25 milliwatts to 100 milliwatts to 200 milliwatts via smart audio, which you control through your radio. Camera is the super wide field of view GL950 Pro. Also comes in the typical Geelang box. Comes with an extra canopy, Insta360 mount, a battery strap, which I didn't use, I used one of my own. Extra set of props. These two zip ties represent the extra zip ties that you get, and they're primarily used for mounting the Insta360 Go mount. Get a Phillips headed screwdriver. It actually comes with 2 of these rubber bands, but I only have one left because the other one broke. And a little bit of foam pad for your battery, but this is just foam, it's not sticky, so I don't recommend you using it for mounting your battery. And we also get this Play 4 Whoop wiring diagram. I am getting just about 100 millimeters motor post to motor post. Arms are very thin at 2 millimeters wide, but they are 4 millimeters tall. And on my scale, it comes in at 37.5 grams. And the recommended battery is a 450 milliamp 2S battery, which brings the weight to just about 64.75 grams. So hopefully you can hear I do have some wind. You may be able to see it in the video as well, as that evergreen kind of moves ever so slightly. The wind on this particular day, because I didn't have very many fly days outside, I know that the wind was rated for 9 miles an hour. But there are gusts that kind of come and go, whether those gusts are 9 miles an hour or not. But we're going to see that wind have an effect. I had earlier flights that were smoother, but unfortunately I broke the frame, which is also something to take note of, is those very thin arms. I did break the frame, and I will show you that crash when we get back to the desk. I have some serious concerns about durability. 1, because I did break the frame, and 2, the motors have 1 millimeter motor shafts. So I'm very concerned that with an unprotected prop, that the probability that the motor shafts at the very least will get bent with relative ease is there. So that's something that you've got to be aware of. I would have preferred to see an 1102 motor with a 1.5 millimeter motor shaft, but in this particular case, that's not what we have. So durability could be a factor, that keeping your motors in good working order could be an issue. And I could have a bent motor shaft right now, but I don't have any other motors like this to put on it to test to see if I can smooth it out. So I have to presume that this is a little bit of that breeze having a little bit of that bobble impact. I rarely have those super low wind days, and when I do, I usually have to take advantage of it and fly whatever I have that's Whoop-like or prop protected-like, because those are very sensitive to wind as well. So it's very light, you know, on my scale under 38 grams, and then you have the 450 milliamp battery. And speaking of that battery, it comes by default with just a rubber band kind of routed through this little piece in the bottom of the frame, which we can look at back at the desk. And I got a lot of flight oddities when I had the battery just with that rubber band. I think that the rubber band isn't thick enough or strong enough, and B, it's too big. It's just not tight enough on the battery to hold it securely. So I ended up having to add a little bit of sticky pad. Didn't use the foam pad that came with it. I added my own sticky pad, and then I added a Cheapo Depot Velcro strap. It does come with its own. At the time I was working on it, I didn't have the accessory box out, so that can be taken care of. But you do have to pull the screws. Well, you have 2 ways. You can cut the rubber band and pull it out, and then you can loosen the screws and thread the battery strap that it comes with through there. Or yet the last way is to remove 2 of the screws that are holding in that bottom piece entirely in order to be able to get your battery strap through there. So those are your 3 options. I did toilet tank the battery because, well, that's how it comes. That's how it's routed for the centerpiece. I did replace the receiver as well. I had some troubles with binding the original receiver. So my experience with this particular quad hasn't been great. You can call it a reviewer's curse, or just that one off that comes out of the box. It's not great, but all those things have to be considered. It does have a capacitor on it on the battery lead, which I didn't highlight. I sometimes do, I sometimes don't. But the further away the capacitor is from the all-in-one flight controller or the ESC, the less it does. And with it being on the battery connector end, there's very little that is doing for us. So if you were to have, whether you have this one or a different machine that has an all-in-one flight controller, I would suggest attaching it directly to the battery pads. That's the best method for increasing what the capacitor can do for you, which is primarily cleaning up your video. We see a lot of feedback oftentimes when on these all-in-one boards, and they're so compact. If we can clean up that power line, we'll get less feedback through our camera image that we see in the goggles. So that's something to consider. It does have good long flight time. I'm going to get slightly over a 4-minute flight, and it's going to come in with the batteries at 3.52 volts per cell, which is where I want to end the flight on disarm. As you see here, we're getting ready. I have to kind of just go over that little water, and then we'll land, and you'll see when I go back to the default screen that our batteries recover to the 3.52 volts. I generally shoot for 3.5 volts per cell. That way I know that my batteries are good maintenance and are ready to be recharged and go again without any damage. First, let's do the crash. I'll play that right up here. I actually set that up to have it with sound, but you really can't hear the impact with the breeze and everything that's going on at the time. I did go straight into a tree, and then I broke the frame. I have that right over here. So I broke an arm, and you can kind of see how I broke it. Pretty much a clean snap, and I was down. And yeah, so while the arms are very, very thin, which that helps make sure all the thrust is going past the arm and not necessarily blowing on the arm and creating any extra resistance, the arms are very, very thin, so I don't think the frame will last all that long. I mentioned it already, but the stems are 1mm shafts. When I say stems, I also mean shafts. Sometimes I use words interchangeably. And you can see it doesn't go all the way down to the prop. These props are drilled out, but I think they need to be drilled out a little bit more. I think it actually encloses at the end a little bit in order to be able to get these props down, because I did try to shove them all the way down. If you can get these props all the way down, you'll be much better off. But again, even more better off, if that makes sense, would be a 1.5mm shaft that we oftentimes find on an 1102 motor, which is still very, very light. The difference between the 1102s that I've weighed and the 0802s is about 1/2 to 3/4 of a gram per motor. So that does increase your weight because that's times 4. The durability of the shaft goes way up when you just add that extra 1/2 millimeter. And I think most of us in the hobby that have been around a while and have experienced a lot of bent motor shafts would validate that. Hopefully you can as well, and you can back that up down in the comment section down below. I mentioned it in the quick roll, I mentioned it in the flight, excuse me. Getting this piece out means you have to take these pieces all the way out, which is kind of a pain in the backside. Like I said, you can't just snip the rubber band and then thread it through. Depending upon your receiver, and the receiver goes right below that area, it could be fairly tight, so you may find you at least have to loosen this plate. But with the rubber band and a 450 milliamp battery, I had lots of flight oddities. Flips and rolls were just unmanageable. You would get all sorts of shakes and wobbles after the fact, and it would be very abrupt and sudden. That it's much better to fly with a little bit of battery pad and a strap that you can actually secure the battery to the quad so it doesn't shift so much in more aggressive turns or moves. They did use the what I call Emax tape, but it's some sort of fabric tape that is not hairy. It doesn't have any fibers off of it. I don't believe this to be hockey tape, which is another term I see oftentimes used to describe it. I wouldn't describe it that way. This is very slick tape, but it does a good job of keeping the motor wires down. It's light. It's relatively easy to work with, so that's a tape I talk about quite a bit on the channel. It does have these LEDs on the side that are kind of neat to look at, and if you fly in a garage or something, might be something you're interested in for chasing purposes. I think if you're flying in the garage, the durability would even be a larger factor because of all the cement. I also broke the zip tie that holds the antenna up out of harm's way, so I had to reinforce that with some tape. These are your antenna wires for your control link. The camera is very wide field of view, which generally I enjoy, but I think this camera gets low marks because of the high amount of fisheye. There is an adjustment, and I notice it as well when I go from other cameras that may have a wide field of view as well to this camera, that there is a flight adjustment that I have to make in order to be able to fly it effectively. Of course, that's easy for you to discern whether it's for you or not by just watching the video that we've already watched. You might be able to see that we can get a little bit of movement out of the canopy and the fish, or not the fish, sorry, I don't know why that's stuck in my mind, but we have the soft mounting here, so you may see a little bit of movement. I don't get a lot when using pressure, and I don't think that played a role in some of the flight bobbling that you saw. I think it was primarily the wind, because as I was flying it, I would notice as the breeze would come up, that I would see it more in the goggles. So, you know, it's very light. You have to be aware of those things. It's not going to suit all flying environments. If you live in a place like I do that has much wind, probably not the best feature of flying something that's this light. Early mornings. I do find early mornings are some of the better times in my area to fly with lower wind, but unfortunately early mornings this time of year are horrible cold. I did also mention the capacitor out here on the end does very little out here. Mainly what this can do is on battery plug-in, it can flatten out that spike when you first plug in that battery, you know, that snap that you get, but after that it just doesn't do a whole lot for us. It does use motor connectors. You can see those down in there, maybe a little bit. Maybe it's a better view from the side. So swapping out motors would be relatively easy. But, you know, I just think it needs 1.5 millimeter shafts and 1102 motors. And probably thicker arms. I think that's how I should wrap this up. While this quad could be fun and has lots of potential, I think there are several things that need to be changed from the manufacturer before I would recommend anyone buying it. And that's 1102 motors, 1.5 millimeter shafts on those motors, wider arms with some additional motor protection. Of course, that then takes it up a whole different weight. The camera issue is fairly subjective. You know, some people might like it and some people might not. You have to look at the flight footage to decide that. I think they could lower the weight by getting rid of that connector right there. That might give us maybe upwards of a quarter or a half a gram possibly. So maybe that can offset some of the carbon fiber changes that they might make. Of course, if you break the camera, then that does mean soldering rather than just, you know, a solder-less replacement. They did use lock nuts. I thought I lost one. Yeah. When I shifted things around, I think I misplaced one of the lock nuts. So I ended up back here going with a nylon nut. I thought that was the best place to have a nylon nut. So I made sure I had lock nuts, the nylon locking nuts on these three positions here. But yeah, I think the frame is a little bit too thin. I think the motors have the potential of bent shafts. I don't notice bent shafts on my motors. In the flight I showed you, I could already have bent shafts. I just don't have these additional motors of these to swap them out to test that theory. So it is only a theory. If you have any comments, questions, suggestions, or otherwise, please let me know in the section down below. I appreciate your time, and thanks for watching.